Sofia Santiago. The name sounded strange even to herself, an echo of a life that no longer belonged to her. Her path was a map of invisible scars, drawn on the dirty, poorly lit streets of a metropolis that devoured souls without ceremony. At 28, she was a survivor, a shadow who moved with the indifference of someone who had already lost everything. Before we dive into the hell her reality became, I need you, the one listening to me, to help me give a voice to stories the world insists on silencing. Our goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, people who believe that narratives like Sofia's need to be told. Subscribe now and comment what city you're watching from, so this story can echo in every corner. Your support is what allows us to continue. She had arrived in the big city with her eyes full of dreams and a suitcase holding more hopes than clothes. The promise of a decent job vanished like smoke, revealing a cruel trap that dragged her into prostitution. The girl from the countryside, who blushed easily and dreamed of a soap opera love, was brutally murdered, and from her ashes Sofia was born, a woman hardened by daily violence, whose only concern was to survive until the next dawn. The memory of who she was before became a painful blur, a ghost she preferred to keep locked in the depths of her mind so as not to go mad with the nostalgia for an innocence lost forever on the cold, merciless asphalt. To the world, Sofia was just another body for sale, an anonymous face in the crowd of the marginalized. But behind the facade of apathy, a sharp mind pulsed, forged by the need to read the hidden intentions in men's eyes. She was a silent observer, cataloguing every gesture, every tone of voice, every sign of danger. This skill was her armor, what kept her alive in a universe where trust was a fatal luxury. She learned to mask her pain with a cutting cynicism, transforming her vulnerability into an invisible weapon. Surviving was not just an instinct, but an art she mastered with terrifying precision, moving through the shadows as if born in them, always one step ahead of the next threat. Amidst the chaos of her existence, there was a single point of light. Layla, younger, more fragile. Layla still carried a remnant of hope in her eyes, a stubbornness in believing that life could be different. The friendship between them was an oasis in the desert of inhumanity that surrounded them. They found refuge in small gestures, sharing a plate of food, a cigarette in the cold dawn, or simply laughing at a silly joke to chase away despair. Layla was Sofia's link to the humanity she felt slipping through her fingers each night. She was the only pure, unconditional love she knew, an anchor that kept her from being completely swallowed by the darkness that enveloped her. The backdrop of their lives was the red light district, a labyrinth of dark alleys and dirty streets where neon lights painted the wet asphalt with sickly colors. Of red, blue, and pink, the air was heavy, thick with the smell of sewage, cheap fried food, and the sweet, desperate perfume of the women who worked there. Every cheap hotel room told stories of loneliness and violence, the stained walls bearing witness to unspeakable secrets. This environment was not just a place, but a living, oppressive entity, a monster that fed on the dreams of its victims and turned them into nightmares. For Sofia, every corner was a reminder of her condition, a constant reminder that she was a prisoner in a cage without bars. The routine was a numbing cycle of brutality and resignation. Encounters with clients were cold transactions, devoid of any intimacy or affection. Sofia would disconnect, turning her body into an object and her mind into an impenetrable sanctuary. She focused on insignificant details in the room, a crack in the ceiling, the hum of a fluorescent light, the dripping of a faucet, to distance herself from the act, to protect herself from a violation that went beyond the physical. It was a defense mechanism she had honed over the years, a way to preserve the minimal sanity she had left. Every night was a silent battle, not to let herself break, to emerge on the other side still whole, even if she felt more and more fragmented inside. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when Sofia's mask of indifference would crack. They usually came in the dead of night, when the city finally quieted down. Staring at her reflection in the dusty glass of a shop window or on the trembling surface of a puddle, she saw a stranger. The eyes of the woman staring back at her were empty, heavy with an exhaustion that seemed ancient, as if she had already lived 1,000 lifetimes of pain. In these moments of vulnerability, the girl from the countryside tried to scream, tried to make herself present, but the woman the city created quickly silenced her. Reality was too heavy a chain, and the only way to keep walking was to forget who she used to be. On her last night of peace, albeit a precarious peace, Sofia and Layla sat on the edge of a sidewalk, watching the incessant motion. Layla, with her stubborn naivete, spoke of one day leaving it all behind, maybe opening a small beauty salon in a beach town, a place where the sun could wash away the bad memories. Sofia listened in silence, a sad smile on her lips. She no longer believed in escapes, for she knew the darkness they carried was not just in the streets, but within them. Still, she squeezed her friend's hand, a gesture of complicity. That memory, the image of Layla's dreamy smile under the sickly glow of the neons, would become the flame that would set Sofia's world on fire. The night began like any other, but a different kind of chill ran down Sofia's spine when she saw Layla get into the luxury car. The client was a distinguished-looking man, a businessman whose polished smile didn't reach his cold, predatory eyes. Sofia felt a knot in her stomach, a dark premonition she tried to ignore, attributing it to fatigue and the constant paranoia that was her companion. She whispered a "be careful" to her friend, who responded with a confident wave. The hours that followed, however, dragged on with torturous slowness. The silence of waiting became a deafening scream in her mind. With every passing car, her heart leaped, but Layla didn't return. The night deepened, and the premonition transformed into an icy certainty that something terrible had happened. The discovery was a blow that stole the air from her lungs. Layla wasn't left at a hospital or on some street corner. She was discarded like trash in a fetid alley between bags of debris and rats. Someone found her by chance, an anonymous figure who called the ambulance. When Sofia arrived at the hospital, the sight of her friend shattered her into 1,000,000 pieces. Layla was unrecognizable, her body a map of brutality, her once vibrant spirit reduced to a breath of life maintained by machines. Sofia's world narrowed, the hospital sounds becoming a distant hum. All that existed was the fragile figure on the bed and a primal rage that began to bubble in her chest, a cold, dark lava that promised to burn everything in its path. Driven by a final thread of hope in the system, Sofia went to the police station. The coldness and disregard she found there were a violence as brutal as what Layla had suffered. The officer who attended her looked her up and down with contempt, his tone laden with cynical judgment. "It's what happens in this line of work," he said with a shrug, as if the assault were an acceptable professional hazard. He filed the report begrudgingly, making it clear that the paper was nothing more than a bureaucratic formality destined to gather dust in a drawer. Sofia left the station humiliated, dehumanized, with the terrifying certainty that, to the world, Layla's life was worthless. They were invisible, disposable. Justice wasn't blind. It simply didn't look. Down, beside Layla's bed, listening to the monotonous rhythm of the machines keeping her alive, Sofia's transformation was completed. The tears of pain and helplessness dried up, giving way to a frightening clarity. The system would not protect them. The law would not punish the aggressor. No one was coming to save them. In that sterile silence of the hospital, a decision was forged in the fire of her pain. If there was no justice, there would be vengeance. If the law didn't punish monsters, she would become a bigger monster herself. Her eyes, once filled with a passive sadness, now shone with a frigid determination. The silent victim died that night, and in her place, A huntress was born. Her purpose was no longer to survive, but to make predators feel the same fear they inflicted. In that moment, I knew I was completely alone. The system had turned its back on me. Society had already condemned me long ago. No one would lift a finger for Layla, and if no one was going to do anything, then the answer had to come from me. I would be the hand that punishes, the echo of every silenced woman's scream. And I know that many of you listening now have felt that same powerlessness, that same rage in the face of injustice. That's why your subscription to this channel is so important. It turns your support into a megaphone, ensuring that my story and those of so many others are not muffled by neglect. Join us so that this fury can become a force for change. The decision, forged in the fire of pain, needed a weapon. Sofia's revenge would not be loud, with the bang of a gunshot, but silent, intimate, and cruel, like the evil she was fighting. She delved into a world she didn't know, spending late nights in dimly lit internet cafes and days hidden in the back of public libraries. The intelligence she once used to survive on the streets was redirected to a single purpose: to study death. She became a dedicated student of toxicology, learning about slow-acting poisons, contact, toxins, substances that could mimic the natural failures of the human body. The prostitute gave way to the self-taught chemist, the victim gave way to the strategist. Every turned page was a step closer to her dark destiny. Finding the poison was her first real step into the abyss. It wasn't something you could buy at a pharmacy. It required her to use her underworld contacts to navigate dangerous conversations and suspicious glances. She found a decadent chemist, a man living on the fringes of the law, and the transaction was made in a dark alley, under a light rain that seemed to want to wash away a guilt that didn't even exist yet. Holding the small glass vial, she felt the weight of the world in her hands. The colorless, oily liquid sloshing inside was the materialization of her fury, a promise of death. That vial was her point of no return, the baptism into her new and terrible faith. The first target was not chosen at random. He was a loan shark, known for his casual cruelty. Man who frequented the district and treated women like disposable objects. A predator who had humiliated her in the past. Sofia became his shadow. For a week she watched him, learning his routine, his vices, his moments of vulnerability. The methodical planning was the perfect counterpoint to the turmoil of emotions she felt. Rage was the fuel, but coldness was the armor. She was no longer a woman acting on impulse, but a hunter setting her trap. Every detail was calculated, every step rehearsed, for she knew the slightest mistake could be fatal. The fear was constant, but the image of Layla in her hospital bed was stronger. The night of the execution was a blur of terror and adrenaline. Sofia's heart pounded so hard she feared he could hear it. Her hands, which trembled under the bar table, had to become steady and precise at the crucial moment. In the cheap hotel room, she played her part with rehearsed perfection, the indifferent seductress, while every fiber of her being screamed. The application of the poison was an intimate and profane touch, a kiss of death. The hours that followed, waiting for the news, were torture. Every siren she heard made her jump. She felt dirty, contaminated by the act, as if the poison had seeped into her own soul. She had become the very thing she despised, someone who takes a life. The confirmation came on the morning news. Businessman found dead in hotel room, suspected of a massive heart attack. A cold relief washed over Sofia, but there was no satisfaction, only a deep emptiness and the grim realization of her power. She had killed a man, and the world kept spinning. No one would mourn him, but she would carry that burden forever. That same day, she visited the hospital. Sitting beside Layla, who remained in a deep coma, she held her hand and whispered, "It was for you, my friend, and this is just the beginning." The promise sealed her fate. Vengeance was not an isolated act, but a campaign, a silent war she would wage alone. With the experience of the first kill, Sofia refined her technique. Fear gave way to a sharp focus. Hesitation turned into lethal efficiency. The second and third victims fell with surgical precision. She learned to choose her targets, to identify the most sadistic predators, the men who hid behind facades of power and respectability to commit their atrocities. Sofia became two people. By day, an anonymous shadow studying her prey. By night, the fatal seductress, an angel of death, who offered pleasure as bait for her deadly trap. She was becoming a whispered legend in the alleys, a ghost that haunted men with guilty consciences. The series of deaths of influential men, always from natural causes, began to attract attention. The media, sniffing out a sensational story, connected the dots. Nicknames were created: the Red Light Black Widow, the Kiss of Death. The stories spread like wildfire, sowing a delicious paranoia in the hearts of the aggressors who frequented the area. Men who were once arrogant and self-assured now looked at the women with a hint of fear, wondering if the next one could be their executioner. Sofia followed the news with a bitter satisfaction. She didn't want fame, but fear was a powerful weapon, and she was using it to protect the women the system refused to see. The investigation landed on the desk of Detective Correa, a man in the twilight of his career, with a tired body and a jaded soul. Arriving at the crime scene of the third victim, an influential politician, Correa smelled the familiar scent of hypocrisy. To him, it was just another case of a rich man whose vice had led him to a pathetic end. He felt no pity for the victim, but a job was a job. With his usual cynicism, he began the procedures, treating it all as bureaucratic routine, little knowing he was facing the most complex and morally ambiguous case of his entire professional life, the hunt for a shadow who personified a twisted justice. Despite his initial skepticism, Correa was a good cop. His mind, though dulled by routine, was still sharp. He began to notice the inconsistencies. Three powerful men, all with a hidden history of violence against women, all dead from apparent heart attacks, too much of a coincidence for his taste. The toxicology reports were clean, but his gut screamed that something was wrong. He began to trace a pattern, an invisible thread connecting the victims not only in their deaths, but in their sins. He realized he wasn't investigating common murders. He was on the trail of an executioner with a moral code of her own. As the legend of the vigilante grew, Sofia sank into her own private hell. Her nights were populated by nightmares, the faces of her targets mixing with Layla's. Loneliness was her constant companion, a heavy cloak that isolated her from the rest of the world. With every life she took, she felt a piece of her own humanity die. The reflection in the mirror showed a stranger with cold, empty eyes. Her expression hardened by death. She was becoming the monster she hunted, a creature of darkness, and the awareness of this fact was a silent torture, the price she paid for her crusade of vengeance. The danger of her journey manifested itself abruptly on a rainy night. A target, a paranoid executive, grew suspicious of something in her behavior. For an instant, Sofia's control wavered. He grabbed her arm, his eyes flashing with suspicion. Her heart froze. Using the agility and cunning learned on the streets, she managed to break free, creating a plausible excuse and disappearing into the night before he could act. The experience left her trembling. It was a brutal reminder that she was not invincible. The razor's edge she walked was thinner than she imagined, and a single misstep would mean the end. It was then that she found his name, the animal, the sadistic businessman who destroyed Layla. After months of following faint clues and listening to whispers in the underworld, she finally identified him. He was a pillar of society, a philanthropist whose public image was impeccable, a wolf in sheep's clothing, protected by a wall of money and power. The discovery ignited a renewed fire in her soul. The other deaths had been a prelude, a training. He was the real objective, the final monster in her labyrinth of hatred. Hunting him would not be like the other times. It would require a perfect plan, unprecedented audacity, and the willingness to risk absolutely everything. Detective Correa, for his part, changed his approach. He knew the key to the case wasn't in the victims' luxury offices, but in the dark alleys where they sourced their sordid pleasures. He began to frequent the red light district, a graying ghost in a wrinkled suit. He watched, he listened, he tried to decipher the silent language of the place. The women looked at him with a mixture of fear and contempt. To them, he was just another man, a representative of the system that had never protected them. Correa felt the hostility but persisted, convinced that the huntress he was looking for was hiding in plain sight, and that is how their paths crossed. On one of his forays, Correa approached Sofia, who was leaning against a wall, watching the movement. To him, she was just another prostitute, a potential source of information. He asked the routine questions. Sofia, in turn, felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized him from the newspapers, the hunter and the hunted, face to face. She remained calm, wearing her mask of cynical indifference. She answered in monosyllables, gave vague information, and deflected every question with the skill of someone who had spent her life hiding. She was manipulating him, playing his game right under his nose. The conversation was a duel of wills disguised as an interview. Correa, with his experience, sensed something different in Sofia. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a depth that didn't match the apathy she projected. He saw the contained pain there, but interpreted it as the weariness of a hard life. She, on the other hand, saw in him the personification of the law that had abandoned her, but also noticed a tiredness in his gaze that was almost familiar. They were two sides of the same broken coin, two lonely beings in a city that didn't care about them. Neither of them knew the true nature of that encounter, but a seed of mutual curiosity was planted. The investigation began to change the old detective. As he dug into the victims' pasts, he found a trail of rot, assault complaints that were hushed up, terrified wives, female employees fired for not giving in to harassment. The men he once saw as pillars of the community were revealed to be predators of the worst kind. For the first time in years, Correa felt his moral compass spin. He was still hunting a murderer, but he began to question who the real victims were and who the real monsters were. The line between right and wrong was becoming dangerously blurred, and he found himself developing a reluctant admiration for the vigilante's brutal logic. As Correa closed in on the truth, Sofia sank deeper into loneliness. The hunt consumed her completely, pushing her away from any remnant of a normal life. Her only moments of peace were the silent visits to the hospital. She would tell Layla, still motionless and unconscious, about her plans, her victories, and her fears. Her friend's inert body was her confessional, the only witness to her transformation. These visits were her ritual, a painful reminder of why she had started all of this. Keeping Layla's memory alive was what kept her from getting completely lost in the darkness of her own actions, the anchor that kept her sane. Sofia's situation became even more precarious. The local pimp, a violent and controlling man named Rocha, began to feel the impact of the deaths on his business. Important clients were disappearing or staying away, scared off by the legend of the Black Widow. Rocha didn't care about justice or the women. He cared about money. He began his own parallel hunt, pressuring the prostitutes, using violence and intimidation to find out who was scaring away his clientele. Sofia was now caught between two fires, the official police investigation and the brutal hunt by organized crime. The city was becoming an ever smaller cage. Memories of Layla before the attack began to haunt Sofia more frequently. Flashbacks of simple moments, a shared laugh, a tight hug, naive plans for the future, invaded her mind at the most unexpected times. The memory of Layla's purity contrasted violently with the blood on her own hands. A corrosive doubt began to settle in her heart. Would Layla, her sweet and gentle friend, approve of the monster she had become? Was she honoring her memory or staining it with every life she took? Vengeance, which once seemed a clear and just path, was now revealing itself to be a moral maze with no exit. In the police lab, a young forensic scientist, unsatisfied with the inconclusive results, decided to run a new type of test on the victim's tissues. And then she found it. A subtle chemical marker, a rare alkaloid, present in trace amounts in all the bodies. It wasn't the poison itself, but a component of its base. The discovery was the missing piece in Correa's puzzle. He now had scientific proof that the deaths were connected and that the killer was someone with access to rare substances, someone intelligent and methodical. The hunt for a ghost had become the hunt for a real person, and Correa felt an adrenaline rush he hadn't felt in years. With the police closing in and time running out, Sofia focused all her energy on the final target, the animal. She knew she couldn't lure him into her territory. She would have to enter his world, a universe of galas, charity events and private security. The idea was audacious, almost suicidal. It would require her to transform once more, not into the seductress of the shadows, but into an elegant and sophisticated woman, capable of blending in with the elite without raising suspicion. It would be her final act, the performance of her life, with death as the prize for the man who destroyed the only pure thing she had. This was the decisive moment, the final act. I was no longer just seeking revenge for my friend. I was carrying out a sentence on behalf of all of them. Every step, every breath, every calculated glance was for Layla and for every woman whose voice was stolen by violence. This fight became bigger than me, and the support I receive from you proves it. By subscribing, you're not just following a story, you're taking a stand with me, ensuring this cry of rebellion is heard loud and clear. Don't let our voices fade into the silence. Join this cause. Correa, now with physical evidence in hand, intensified his search. He began to cross-reference the victim's data, looking for a human link, and then he found it. A name. Layla. A young prostitute brutally assaulted months earlier, a case filed as unsolved. The attacker was never identified. The detective felt a chill. The pattern fit with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a random vigilante. It was a personal vendetta. He pulled Layla's file and saw the name of the only friend who had filed the complaint, Sofia Santiago. The image of the cynical, sad-eyed woman he had interviewed flashed back into his mind. He had found his ghost, using a false identity and a stolen dress. Worth more than she had ever earned in her life, Sofia managed to get into a charity masquerade ball, where the animal was the host. The opulence of the place was nauseating, a grotesque contrast to the misery she came from. She moved through the ballroom, a predator in a field of prey, the poison hidden in a small, discreet ring. The smile on her face was a mask as elaborate as those covering the guests' faces. Beneath the silk and satin, her body was tense, every muscle poised for the final confrontation. The tension was almost unbearable. For a brief moment, seeing him on stage, smiling and being applauded, Sofia's confidence wavered. He seemed untouchable, a god on his own golden Olympus. His impunity was so vast, so absolute, that her plan seemed small, a futile gesture of despair. What could a woman like her do against a man like him? The doubt paralyzed her. But then she closed her eyes, and the image that came to her was not of the businessman on stage, but of Layla, intubated and broken in a hospital bed. The fury returned, stronger and purer than ever, burning away any remnant of fear. She was not futile. She was the consequence. With a glass of champagne in hand and an enigmatic smile, Sofia approached her target. She moved with a fluid grace, a panther gliding through a hall of gazelles. The animal noticed her immediately, his eyes raking over her with a collector's greed. To him, she was just another potential trophy for his night. Sofia used his arrogance as a weapon. whispering an irresistible proposal in his ear, a promise of pleasures money couldn't usually buy. She led him away from the crowd, to a silent, opulent library, with walls lined with books he had probably never read. The air grew heavy, the door closed, and the trap was set. The ensuing silence was the harbinger of the storm. Inside, under the dim light of a lamp, Sofia's performance changed. The seductress gave way to a frigid figure, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that unsettled him. "We need to talk about one of your past acquisitions," she said, her voice low and emotionless. He laughed, confused. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sofia took a step forward. "I'm talking about a girl named Layla." The name hung in the air like a toxic mist. He searched his memory, the smile vanishing from his face. He didn't remember the name, but the mention of a girl from his past, in that context, made him understand that this was not a seduction. It was a reckoning. His arrogance turned to aggression. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you'd better leave," he snarled, taking a threatening step towards her. But Sofia didn't back down. For the first time, she felt bigger than her fear. "You don't remember her," she continued, her voice now a thread of steel, "but her body remembers your every touch, and I'm here to make sure you never forget." It was then that she raised her hand, showing the discreet ring on her finger. "This is my gift. To you, a gift in her name." Terror finally broke through the businessman's facade of power. He saw death in her eyes and understood he had walked into a deadly trap. In a desperate act, he lunged at her. The fight that followed had none of the elegance of cinema. It was a savage and desperate confrontation. The luxury of the library became an arena. Books flew from the shelves. A crystal vase shattered on the floor. He was stronger, but she was driven by a fury that was equal to 1,000 armies. She fought with tooth and nail, using the agility and the accumulated pain of a lifetime as fuel. At the climax of the struggle, as he pinned her against a bookshelf, she managed to scratch his neck with the ring. A thin, almost insignificant scratch, but one that sealed his fate. The poison entered his bloodstream. Panting and bruised, Sofia stepped back as he brought a hand to his neck, looking at his fingers as if he couldn't believe what was happening. It was at that exact instant that the library's double doors burst open. Detective Correa stood in the threshold, his gun aimed steadily at the scene. His eyes quickly took in the chaos. The powerful man staggering, his face already pale from shock and the initial effects of the toxin, and the woman standing, her dress torn and a look of triumphant exhaustion. The law had arrived, too late to prevent the crime, but in time to judge the criminal. Time seemed to freeze, trapping the three of them in a triangle of vengeance, justice and duty. "Police! Hands up now!" Correa shouted, his voice echoing in the tense silence. His instincts told him to arrest Sofia, the murderer he had hunted for months. But she didn't move. She didn't even look at his gun. Her eyes met the detective's, and in them there was no fear or defiance, only a profound emptiness. She was finished. Her private war had ended with that scratch. On the floor, the animal began to convulse, the poison doing its swift and merciless work. Sofia didn't try to flee, didn't try to explain herself. She stood there, a broken statue in the midst of her macabre masterpiece, awaiting the verdict of a system she never believed in. Correa felt the weight of his entire career in that moment. The law was clear. He had to arrest her, but justice, true justice, seemed murky and complex. He looked at the dying man on the floor, remembering the files he'd read, the lives that monster had destroyed with impunity. He looked at Sofia, the living consequence of the failure of the system he represented. She wasn't a psychopath, she was a weapon, forged by the negligence of him and his colleagues. In that instant, Correa found himself at a moral crossroads. Arrest the vigilante and protect the memory of a monster, or what? The decision he made there would not just be about the law, but about the soul of a tired old cop. In a gesture that seemed to last an eternity, Detective Correa slowly lowered his gun. The barrel of the pistol pointed to the marble floor, a sign of surrender not to Sofia, but to a deeper, more uncomfortable truth than the law itself. His eyes remained fixed on hers, and in his gaze there was no condemnation, but a shared exhaustion, a silent understanding that transcended words. He said nothing. He didn't have to. With a subtle nod of his head, he indicated an exit at the back of the library. It was an act of silent rebellion against the system he had served his whole life, a tacit admission that on that night justice was not in his holster, but in the hand of the woman he was supposed to arrest. Sofia understood the gesture immediately. That man, the hunter who had been on her trail, was giving her a choice, an escape she never thought she would have. For a second, a glimpse of humanity connected the two adversaries. She nodded, an almost imperceptible movement, a silent thank you for the unexpected mercy. Then, without looking back, she turned and walked towards the darkness. She moved with the lightness of a ghost, slipping through the door and disappearing into the rainy night. She left behind the body of her tormentor, the cop in a moral crisis, and the identity of Sofia Santiago. The hunt was over. What was left of her now was just an echo, free from her mission, but eternally chained to her actions. By the time the sirens wailed in the distance, Correa had already constructed the official narrative in his mind. He picked up the phone and reported a robbery gone wrong, his voice firm and professional, hiding the earthquake shaking his soul. He deliberately contaminated the crime scene, erasing traces of Sofia's presence, ensuring the official investigation would lead to a dead end. The businessman's death would become another unsolved mystery in the city. The next morning, Detective Correa turned in his badge and his gun, requesting immediate retirement. He left behind not just a job, but a lifetime of certainties that now lay in ruins, forever haunted by the vigilante he chose to let disappear. On the streets of the red light district, life went on. But something had indelibly changed. The legend of the vigilante, once a sensational rumor, took deep root in the consciousness of the place. Fear switched sides. Now, it was the predators who looked over their shoulders, who hesitated before committing an act of cruelty. The name, Sofia Santiago, was never heard again, but her essence remained. She became a cautionary tale, a protective ghost whispered. Among the women, a dark promise that impunity had a price, her personal revenge transformed into something greater, an invisible shield forged in fear, the only language the monsters seemed to understand. In the end, Sofia became an idea, a terrible and necessary symbol that when institutions fail to protect the vulnerable, pain itself rises up to be judge, jury, and executioner. Her story is not just about revenge, but about the echo of the silent screams of countless women. Bringing this account to you was more than a narration. It was a duty, and it is thanks to the support of everyone who listened to the end that voices like hers are not lost to oblivion. If you believe that more stories like this need to come to light, subscribe to the channel. Each new subscription is a vote of confidence, a promise that we will continue to fight against the silence. Thank you for your strength and for your viewership.